Okay, great. Well, let's get going, everybody. This is a meeting of the steering committee of the Vermont Climate Council. Good morning. Um, and we do have quorum. That's great. I'm dropping the meeting materials in the chat, which is the agenda. I'm happy to walk through that agenda right now. Let me just share my screen with it, actually, while we talk. All right, so first thing we wanted to do this morning was some planning, planning particularly the council, and really lift our gaze up to the finish line, which is getting this thing in by the end of June. This thing being the revised climate action plan, sorry. Um, and so we're going to talk a little bit about a proposal there and how that's landing and make some adjustments in real time to sort of the cadence of council meetings and what needs to get done and how that's going to get done. So that's the first thing we want to do. And there's as in the agenda, you can see a suggestion about what that could look like. The second thing we want to do is talk about the more near-term issue of finishing the work of the subcommittees and what we really, as much clarity as possible that we can give subcommittees about what we're asking them to turn in to the council in December. And so that also requires us to talk a little bit about the prioritization, circle back to some of those existing guidance documents we've offered to subcommittees and see if there's anything else. There's one administrative thing we need to do before we finish, which is for the new members of the council, confirm their appointments to the subcommittees. And that's already, they've expressed preference. I think it's already happening, but there's a formality where you as a steering committee need to approve that or weigh in on that. We'll do public comment before we finish. That's about 9:50. As always, our protocols here are if you're a member of the steering committee, we encourage you to have your camera on if you're in a place to do that, or support. If you are observing our meeting today, we encourage you to keep your camera off. Okay. That's our agenda. Any questions or friendly amendments to the agenda before we dive into it?
Nope.
Okay. Jared, yeah? Good? Okay. All right, let's do it. I'm going to keep this up actually because this is where we have the this suggestion here. And Jane also posted let me actually show this. There should be a writing timeline. This is like the detail in the writing timeline. I won't go into that right now. But I wanted to sort of, with all of you, think through the next 6-7 months. Jane, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sorry. Just one thing on the agenda. I'm noting that we don't have minutes from our last meeting, which is probably just an oversight on our part. So
All right,
I'll just
approval
make
of the minutes. Yes.
Liz and I can make. I mean, I'm 100%. I think that they're online. So, but
Well,
without them being linked, I'm not sure if the steering committee wants to review or not.
well, we could definitely take a quick peek at those minutes if they're posted. They're minutes from our September 9th meeting, if that's the last one. And they are linked online. They are here. I'll drop them in the chat if folks want to take a second. That's a good housekeeping thing. Apologies, we didn't do that. I'll give folks just a moment to click through that. Does anyone need a little more time to look at these minutes? Would anyone like a little more time? Are there any concerns with the minutes from our last meeting? It's absolutely okay to say, I'm not ready yet to answer that question. Okay, not hearing any concerns and not hearing any requests for additional time, let's treat those minutes as approved. Thanks, Jane, for reminding us.
One question I have is at the
Yeah.
beginning of minutes, it notes that we um, unintentionally skipped over the approval of the minutes, but
Right.
it's not clear to me whether we then came back and approved them or there's an outstanding set of minutes from the
I
meeting
think there's an
before the
outstanding.
last meeting.
Yeah, I think there's an outstanding one. I think we did exactly the same thing I just did now, which was I jumped right through it a million miles an hour. So that set of minutes will be from August 19th. They are posted. I will drop those in the chat. I'll give folks just a moment to look at that. Would anybody like a little more time with those minutes?
I
Any?
just noticed.
Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
No, I see. Sorry, Kelly has her hand up.
Oh, sorry. I have a little thing on my. Kelly, go ahead. Yeah.
I had two things. One in the minutes for last meeting that it says, sorry, my helper is here, which is why my camera's off.
All good.
My little
Say hi.
my 3-year-old is very helpful. The meeting minutes for the last meeting, it says members of the public, and it just has like highlighted yellow XXX. So
Oh.
we're missing the name of whoever the other commenter was, and then in the 2 meetings ago, it doesn't list who was present.
From subcommittee. Yeah.
Yeah, and I noticed that just
think
because
steering
I
committee
wasn't
members.
able to attend that, and I know we usually put that at the beginning. Those are my only two comments.
Great. Let me so for the minutes of August 19th, we need to name steering committee members present. And for the minutes of September, we don't have the second person who provided public comment. Is that our problem? Let me just see what went on there. Sorry, this is a little sloppy. Oh, indeed. Okay, we can fix that. Thanks, Kelly. Anything else, folks, on the minutes?
There's in the August 19th, just for accuracy, the in the 9:40 a.m. section of the agenda, I think this is on page 2.
Yep.
It should say on the updated social cost of greenhouse gases. It says updated cost of greenhouse gases recommendation.
Oh, yeah. Charlotte, are you getting all these? Yeah, thanks. Great. Thank you. Anything else, folks? Are we okay to move on from those 2 sets of minutes? Consider them approved with those changes? All right. Thank you all. And apologies, like I say, for a little bit of sloppiness there, both in me remembering to do that and also having some X's and things like that in there. All right. So that brings us back to today's agenda. And the first thing we wanted to do was look out into the future and imagine what's it going to take for the council to get to the finish line on an updated climate action plan. In the agenda is, and I'll share my screen with it now, one way of doing this, right? This is sort of Jane and Liz and I putting our heads together thinking about what's going to take to do the work that needs to get done to get to the July 1st deadline. And this is the suggestion. And again, this is a suggestion. One thing you may have noticed is the date of the December council meeting shifted back a week so we could give steering subcommittees more time. So it's on December 16th now. And our goal for that meeting would be that all the subcommittees are able to present their pathways, strategies, and actions, their recommendations. We have one more steering committee meeting before then, so we don't have a draft agenda to show you right now for that one. We can talk about that today if you want to, and we have one more meeting to sort that out among us.
We actually have two, David, just so you know.
Oh, we have two, even better.
Yeah.
Great. So we have time to sort that meeting out. Going forward, the idea was once the subcommittees turn into the council those recommendations, Jane and Liz and whoever wants to help out, you all as a steering committee are going to have to pull all this together into starting to really consolidate into a draft. And so we think by late January, we'll have some sort of what that initial consolidation might look like, and we can spend some real time with it as a council and help to shape that. By February, there's going to be two key inputs, and Jane can help correct me, or Jared, you probably know these. Actually, almost most of you know them. But we should have modeling that's going to be helpful. And Jane and Jared, you can say a little bit about what that modeling is. And we should have the results of the ongoing Cap and Invest study ready. And those are really two important inputs to help shape this plan, this updated plan. So we're thinking do some meetings in February so that the full council can sit with the implications of those technical reports. In March, this is where we're really going full tilt to get a consolidated draft document out the door. And it probably is not going to be gorgeously formatted or anything like that, but it'll be a draft document that can go out for public comment and consultation. And the goal is to get that out the door by the end of March. And that's going to require the council to meet once or twice in March to review that draft and feel comfortable with that draft as a draft document. Or at least a draft worthy of public consultation. April is a month of doing that public outreach, and we're hopeful that counselors are going to be involved in that, the variety of things that happen during April, both in person, online, various different modalities of doing things. We can talk about that later. May, the council needs to circle back in one or two meetings and make some sense of what was heard during that consultation, make any final adjustments to the plan based on that, and get the final content approved. And then the goal is by the first week of June that all of the substantive content of the updated plan has been approved by the council. And then it's just formatting and beautifying and turning it into the deliverable. So that's the vision of how this would go. Very interested to hear from all of you, steering committee members. Like, does that sound like a reasonable approach? Jane, jump in, please.
No, I really look forward to hearing from the steering committee and appreciated your overview, David, and just wanted to say that this is really consistent with what we've been telling subcommittees, which is really like this is their time to be doing hard work between now and December. And then really the burden and the challenge of making decisions should live with the council and come up to the council for the 6 months of really iterating and developing the plan. So it's really sort of getting the subcommittees between now and December to craft recommendations, but the decisions around sort of the priority recommendations, anything that is being cut or want to add, and that writing really lives with counselors. So it's not like, I just want to stress that because we've been sort of saying to the subcommittees, this is the work time for you, and then the burden's going to shift. And to do that, I do think the council needs to meet more often.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I wonder if it doesn't, not that I need any more meetings, but the full council hasn't met since September, and waiting till mid-December. I don't know if there are issues being raised by subcommittees or things that would be well served to have even an hour-long meeting just for the council to get together and hear brief updates from the subcommittees. But I worry that if there are questions, there isn't a lot of time for subcommittees to go back with the schedule as proposed.
That's an interesting idea. Huh. Okay. Let's sit with that idea for a second. Jared, where were you going?
I had a different question. So if we want to pause on and address Secretary Moore's question first, I'm happy to hold.
Okay, let's do that for a second. So the proposal is, and let me understand you a little bit more, Julie. Like, if we met for an hour, it would be subcommittee co-chairs being like, this is what we're working on. This is, these are the sticky wickets. We want to just flag key things to the council. Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, in like mid-November.
Okay.
And
How do you feel about that? Yeah, go ahead, Jared.
I was going to just, if this is still correct, I see on our calendar, or at least on my calendar, a November 14th meeting of the steering committee. And I wonder if, since that's already on the books, if we could just invite subcommittee co-chairs to join that meeting and have that as a core part of that agenda.
Right. Right. And maybe we give counselors some strong other counselors beyond yourselves, strong encouragement to come join as well, perhaps.
Yeah,
I do think that there's, oh, sorry.
Oh no, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I do think that there's a little bit of a challenge in that I think subcommittees have been working backwards from assuming that they have to have their draft recommendations ready by December. So I don't know if everything that would be surfaced as it's likely to be surfaced as an issue that is not fully resolved will be known by that point, but we might know some things in mid-November about how things are proceeding, and that I agree that could be a good check-in opportunity and option to invite counselors who are interested to be part of that discussion. But it feels like primarily the ask we could accomplish what Secretary Moore is suggesting, which I agree with, by primarily asking the subcommittee co-chairs to join in on that meeting.
Okay. Bram, Kelly, thoughts? Any?
Yeah, my apologies. I had some technical difficulties, so I dropped out for a little bit of that.
Okay. We're just talking about, I don't know if you heard the last bit, but Julie was saying it would be pretty helpful actually have the council to, have some visibility into what's going on with the subcommittees before our December 16th meeting. So we're looking at there's a steering committee meeting on the books for November 14th. We could invite co-chairs. We could invite other counselors. That's the idea that's on the table right now.
I think that would be really helpful.
Okay, great. And Kelly, any thoughts?
That sounds good to me.
Okay, so in sum, let's turn that to the November 14th meeting into something where we're convening the co-chairs and we're also encouraging counselors to join us and have a conversation. Okay, great.
David,
Jane?
may I make one suggestion?
Yeah.
The reason I like making it a whole council meeting and just want to propose that idea is that we are doing engagement in earnest over the next 6 weeks, and there is a burden on CAO staff to sort of summarize and go to subcommittees and really communicate that information out. Not a burden that we can't handle, like that's the job, but administratively, like that information about what the public is saying at all of those meetings we're holding, it would be nice for the council to hear it and understand then how subcommittee members are adapting and being responsive to that. So there could be this meeting in November that really summarizes the engagement that we're having between the, I kid you not, 14 to or 15 input sessions that we're having between now and mid-November between the Cap and Invest and the subcommittee meetings and municipal meetings. And so I just want to echo that that might be another way to think about that meeting, rather than it, like it would save some time and we could invite key subcommittee members to that meeting actually to also hear and digest some of that information.
Okay. It's turning in quite the meeting. All right. So it sounds like that meeting would have two purposes then. One would be hearing from co-chairs, and we can give them some instruction about what we're most interested in are sort of the key things that are emerging and any kind of issues that are challenging you think it would be helpful to signal up to the council now, and maybe even get some feedback from the council. And then the second purpose would be to lay out some of these key themes that are emerging in all this public engagement and stakeholder engagement, different types of engagement that are happening over the next 3 weeks. Any concerns with that? Does that seem like a good plan? And we call it a council meeting, not a steering committee meeting. Okay. We can run with that. Thanks for that. Bram, you about to jump on something?
Yeah, I was just gonna note, looking at the calendar, that that meeting on November 14th is scheduled for 8:30 a.m. and Cross Sector has a meeting scheduled at noon, which is plenty of time to do the two meetings, but does not leave people who are members of those much time to do anything else that day. But I don't really see any easier way around that. So just a note.
Yeah, and I think you can see my screen. What I'm doing here is you can see what's going on with oh, right. Oh, good. So Ag and Ecosystems doesn't have a meeting that morning. Okay, great. A day of the Climate Council. All right. All right, so that was one issue. Thank you, Julie, for kicking us off on that.
Before we leave that,
go ahead. Yeah.
Before we leave that, can I just ask a clarifying question? Did we have a proposed date for this new full council meeting, or are we going to try to identify one?
No, I think this is it. The November 14th we're calling it a council meeting.
Okay, I guess. I mean, looking at that calendar, it looked like there was still public input sessions yet to happen, and I thought Jane was proposing part of the purpose of the meeting was to summarize the feedback heard in the public input sessions. Maybe I'm wrong, but it looked like when you had the calendar up, David, there were still 2 public input sessions, maybe 3 to occur.
Yeah, there will have been 14. So I think the idea is maybe you won't get everything, but you'll get quite a bit. But Jane, if you had a different vision of that.
I mean, I also just wonder if we get rid of the steering committee meeting and add a council meeting, then when we'll be doing our planning for the December council meeting, which is going to be really important in terms of the pathways, strategies, and actions. I wonder about the idea of keeping the 14th as it is, and I don't know, maybe on the 20th or something, doing like sometime before Thanksgiving, but after the input sessions have happened. I just would be, if we want to pause to summarize the public feedback that we've received to consider as we go about making recommendations, I'd feel a little awkward being one of the participants in those last 3 that, didn't get heard from in terms of the summarizing back to the council.
Okay. So there's a couple ways to solve for that. One is to make a council meeting that's later than the 14th. Another is that the input sessions that didn't make it into that summary on the 14th get summarized and lifted up in subsequent meetings. That's another way to deal with it. I hear you as well, Jared, concerned about sort of losing steering committee time to plan for the December 16th meeting. And I could see that could be a little nerve-wracking. I don't know what folks think. I think everyone's a little nervous though about adding stuff into the calendar. Our next, after this, we have a steering committee meeting that's a week before the 16th. But I don't want to get too we got a lot of stuff to do this morning. I don't want to spend too much more time on this. I felt like there was a fairly good consensus around turning this into a council meeting. Jared, can we solve your problems or solve your concerns with either, making sure we summarize these, whatever's left over, and make sure those get summarized and lifted up to the council as well?
If
And or
if
some-
folks think that's the best approach, I'm happy to go that way. I just wanted to raise the question.
Okay, let me just, for the interest of time, can folks live with the idea of turning this 14th meeting into a council meeting in the way we described it with the two purposes? Any input sessions that maybe didn't make it in there, we can summarize those and make sure they get lifted up appropriately. Kelly?
I was looking at the December calendar and I see 2 steering committee meetings in the week leading up to the council meeting.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm not sure what happened there.
I mean, theoretically, one of those could be the one that turns into a quicker council meeting. I'm not sure. I was like, oh, that's a lot of meetings. So
Yeah, I think this is a mistake, honestly, these two.
that sort of looks like it, but they're on there. They're on my personal calendar also. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a mistake, but I think we can solve that. And I think Liz will figure out what's going on with the calendar invites there. Jane's switching devices right now, so she can't weigh in.
We
I think-
we added the 9th, we already had the 12th. So it could, I think the idea of potentially turning those into one of them into a council meeting.
But it'd be a little weird to do council meetings back to back like that. I think
Jane,
the intent that
Jane did put a comment in the chat supporting moving the session to after the last of the feedback sessions.
Okay. All right. Well, then we just need to schedule, if folks want to do that, we need to schedule another meeting of the council and pick a day and just go for it. And that's, if you want us to do that, we can try to work with people's schedules and figure out what would be the most likely day for folks to be able to be present.
I think
Julie?
it'd be cleaner rather than adding a second shorter meeting to kind of come back to the additional public comment. Let's just do it all at once in addition to a status update on the subcommittee work and emerging areas of clarity and lack of.
Okay. Okay. All right, so maybe the week before here, the 20th, as Kelly says in the thing, I'd be nervous to try to do this with us in real time right now, but if folks conceptually would like that better, to just schedule something up an hour, hour and a half. We want to do those two things. It'll probably need to be an hour and a half, maybe even 2 hours. And we can look on the 20th. Any last thoughts on that? What I'm understanding you to say is don't turn the 14th into a council meetings like what we discussed earlier. Find another time after all these sessions are done, somewhere in this time frame. Yeah. And then this week is the Thanksgiving week, which can be challenging to schedule meetings.
Yep.
And then it's into December, and so you could do it December 2nd or something like that. But then you're only 2 weeks away. Okay. How about this? Let's find a time. December or November 20th is looking like a good potential. We'll aim for something in that time range. Liz and Jane and I can try to figure that out and schedule that up. Probably it's like 90 minutes, maybe max 120. Does that sound right? Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. Excellent. Moving
Yeah.
on.
Are you seeing Jane in the chat? She suggested November 22nd to give
Yeah.
enough. Yeah.
Great. Sure. Absolutely. All right. Okay. So I want to lift the gaze up beyond December as well and start to think about what's needed out into early next year. Jared, you had wanted to chime in on some other topic.
Yeah.
What's that?
So my question, and apologies, I'm off video and making more coffee. So my question is, I was looking at the Gantt chart that was put together, and thank you for whoever put that together. I think that's a helpful reference. It looked like there was a lot of planned copy editing and graphic design in, I think, November and December. And I just want to clarify, is that for like a short, like rough draft to go out for public feedback? Because, or is that an error and that those dates should have actually been late spring, early summer, in terms of what we're doing with the cap?
I can talk to that briefly.
Yeah, that sounds like a Jane question. Yeah.
So there's a couple things going on with that Gantt chart. There is an interest from CAO to work. We've been talking with the CMO about how this time around to use templates and guidance from the beginning so that we don't end up with just a stapled Microsoft Word document as a climate action plan, but actually look at how we pull together a cohesive, visually appealing plan. Some of these are pipe dreams right now, the photography and stories, but we have some funding specifically in CPRG funds for plan design for the CCAP, because you'll recall that the climate action plan is consistent for us with the CCAP that we're required to produce through CPRG funds. And so that federal grant gave us some capacity around doing some storytelling, which we didn't do in the first plan and had hoped to do after the first plan was published. So really trying to lift up Vermonters and their voices in the plan and how they connect to actions. That's the same with photographs. So Sophie, myself, and Liz have been working with the marketing office in Vermont to think about how we tap some retainer contracts for that support. And so this is really Sophie's best guess at planning out that work. And then what I tried to do at the bottom of this document is really think about what the chapters are of the plan and when they need to be drafted, which this just built off of the work that we had looked at last time as a steering committee, the PDF of updating chapter titles and thinking about what could stay consistent from the first plan and what needed to be revised and who was drafting what. So this is all those chapters sort of coming together in a way that would give us time to edit and sort of format in a way that, again, is not the way the first plan looked, which I think we all would like something nicer than the first plan from a visually appealing place. So that's what this is. So yes, the timelines is what we're working on right now around contracting and thinking about capacity in our office to support that.
Jade, I bet Jared's comments around this kind of thing up in here where it's like copy editing and graphic design, it's all in November and a little confused.
Right, yeah, like
final text, like whose final text?
Yeah, I don't actually, to be honest, that would be a Sophie comment. So Sophie and I can look at that together, but she had set this up around sort of timing with the it looks like she has start dates and didn't actually put ends, but maybe it's around the actual contractor. So you're right, Jared, that none of, like, our goal though would be like a lot of stuff, like not the substance of the plan, but the chapters, like the underpinning of the science or the climate change in Vermont chapter that Dr. Leslie Ann Dupini-Giroux writes, like that kind of stuff could be done by March, because as soon as that kind of, the stuff we're not deliberating on, the sort of context would need to be done so that we could start editing and formatting that stuff sooner.
Yeah. So in terms of the cadence presented earlier, that's primarily around the substantive recommendations and the pathways, strategies, and actions, and then the supporting chapters that provide context and additional explanation will be on a longer time frame.
Well, we should maybe we drop in the chat, David, and I can do that and stop talking in a second. I'll drop in the chat the PDF from our last steering committee meeting, and none of that's really changed. So the chapters that are being drafted, like everything that can be done by March should be done by March. And that's really the stuff that are the pieces being written in subcommittees, the chapters around the pathways, the narrative components, understanding that decision-making around actions will still be evolving in the spring, and the executive summary and those components can't be drafted till the end.
Okay. I'm just throwing that chart in the.
I guess what I was just referring to, Jane, and I think we're on the same page, is that like when we see the first bullet points of this suggested cadence for discussion in today's agenda, that like where it says late January 2025, council reviews an emerging consolidated draft of the updated plan. The consolidated draft would primarily be the outline plus the emerging pathways, strategies, and actions, right? Yeah, okay.
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Jared. That's helpful to do that little detour into that document. I do want to bring us back to the overall sense. There's some implications of doing what's on this page, which is we're meeting monthly, if not twice a month, early next year. Meeting in January, meeting once or twice in February, depending on how we want to. Maybe it's just once we look at both of those technical outputs, right? In March, we're really going to need to meet once or twice to feel confident about the content in that draft that's going out. There's going to be some decision-making moments in there, like, are we comfortable with this draft, right? It is not approving the final thing. It's just saying it's good enough to go out for public comment. And then April, maybe we don't meet. Maybe it's just participate in all that public outreach. And then May, imagine the sort of decision-making that needs to happen, reviewing the public comment and the other comment, and then signing off on the content. So I'm curious how you all feel about that as a council, in the time commitment that seems appropriate to get the job done and seems also appropriate for your time of a semi-volunteer process, which is the council. Any thoughts?
You know, I suspect that one or two in March means two.
Yeah, I think it does, personally.
Yeah, it is a lot, but I think it also looks necessary. It doesn't look like there's anything that's, easily cut. And I think we always knew that there was going to be, ups and downs in terms of, that the time commitment wasn't going to be even, and that it was going to increase significantly as we approached the deadline of the, revised plan being due. So.
Any friendly amendments to this then, to make this better, stronger, more realistic? Anything you all would do differently?
if this is going to go to the council, or if this kind of suggested cadence, it might be helpful to just add a little bit more language, like in late January, to say reviews an emergent consolidated draft of the update. It could say, like, in parentheses, outline plus draft substantive recommendations. I just wouldn't want somebody to read consolidated draft of the updated plan to think that some of the chapters that we've been talking about need to be ready by January.
Got it. Anything else?
How does anyone have any sense of how likely the subcommittees are to be ready to present their recommended pathways, strategies, and actions on December 16th?
We are encouraging them strongly to do it and be ready. I think each one of them is pushing hard, and it's gonna, I think that's our next conversation as well, is, you know, how do we give them as much clarity as possible what we need them to do and what they don't need to do. I'd be curious, those of you who are participating actively in subcommittee meetings, how you feeling about December 16th? I mean, each of you participate in at least one.
Yeah. So that's 8 weeks out. And I think for cross sector, I think the electric sector, the electric work group is in good shape. I think transportation is likely to be ready. And I actually don't have much visibility into thermal.
Right.
I think the issue really, Bram, tell me if you agree, is that individually, I think the subgroups are getting their work done, but we haven't had, like, I've heard the buildings and thermal, and we've had long presentations and detail on that, but we haven't, in my view anyway, really engaged on things that we might choose or issues that may come up as disagreements, or, you know, that sort of thing. So I think that's the work that hasn't happened. And there's some risk that we all just sort of fall into taking the subgroup recommendations rather than really having a subcommittee moment of culling and choosing across areas.
Right. Right. That's going to feel squeezed, that subcommittee moment, once task groups have presented up to the subcommittees fully. There's not going to be a ton of time for you as a subcommittee to think, you know, across it all. All right. All right. So we know it's going to be challenging. Bram, is that causing you to think about some friendly amendment to this?
No, other than I'd say the importance of regular harassment of the subcommittees about how many days are left and so forth.
Right. How serious that deadline is. Yeah. Okay. Jane?
Well, maybe as we talk about prioritization, I just wanted to sort of hone in on this point that Liz is making, because I know that other co-chairs and members have raised this issue of, like, how much do we, like, go action by action and vote in the subcommittee, and or, like, how do we put together a package to go to the council, and where should that tension or decision making really live? Like, should the subcommittee just, like, really put everything up to the council? Should they sit with it and really stew on it? I think that is a consistent question that I've heard from cross sector, but that cross sector is not alone in that sort of tension. I think there's other subcommittees too that feel it.
And it feels like a good segue into that next conversation of what the council really wants out of the subcommittees. And so I'd love to go to that conversation. And before we do, is there anything else, you know, into the spring, you know, winter and spring next year that we want to say? It sounds like we don't say 1 or 2 in March. We probably say 2 in March. And maybe we say one in February, so we review the modeling and the cap and invest, something like that. We could be a little more decisive there. And then, as Jared says, provide a little bit more detail so people understand, hopefully, the nuance of what we're talking about. Anything else to this before we jump into that conversation that Jane just led us to? Is this good? Okay, great. So the conversation that Jane just led us to, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen, is what do we want out of, what do you as a council want out of the subcommittees when they present up to you? And the reason why that question is important is because it helps inform what Jane's saying and what Liz was alluding to, which is like, how much do you want subcommittees to reach broad agreement? Secretary Moore, your mic is open, which you may or may not want. You know, how much do we want subcommittees to hash through the sort of agreement building process, or just sort of throw it all up there, or provide, you know, say, hey, there's some different views in our committee about this, but we're just setting it up to the council. Like, those are the kinds of things I think are important for you all as a steering committee to think about. One other thing I want to just mention is the idea of prioritization. And this time around, you all were inspired by the state hazard mitigation plan, which sort of made I think they made well, they had their 110, and then they narrowed that to 50 to say these are really 50 important, and then they narrowed that to like a top 10 or something. And what we agreed is probably not to do 3 layers, but have the general layer and then a top something, top 20, top 30, whatever you want to call, of amongst all these 232 actions, like what are, you know, 30 that we really want to call attention to the legislature and the administration. So that requires a moment within the subcommittees probably to do that, or the subcommittees could punt and send it up to the council. But I think the hope is that the subcommittees do that. And then there's what Liz mentioned, which is some sort of culling of like, this actually isn't great. We don't even want to bring that up to the council. Or you could do something along the lines of, you know, on these 5 things, subcommittee members had really different views. And those views range from this to that. Anyway, that's me speaking a little bit, but the core question really is, what would you like to see from subcommittees so subcommittees know what that work looks like in the final weeks? Jared?
Yeah, I mean, I guess where my mind goes is that since neither the task groups or the subcommittees are decision-making bodies, that it is solely the council that is in a place of decision-making responsibility and authority in terms of what recommendations move forward. And because of how short the timeline is, I would be wary of telling the subcommittees that they have to make decisions or have unanimous recommendations. I think that what comes from the subcommittees, it would be helpful to know, is this a consensus or unanimous recommendation up to the council? Or if not, then, you know, there are a number of instances, for instance, I'm working on the thermal task group where we have italicized or highlighted text where we could go one way or another way. And so the recommendation could have an option A or B for council consideration. And then the subcommittee or task group members could say, you know, here was the discussion around this, and here's the area of agreement versus where there may still be disagreement. I just feel like trying to require the recommendations to get a kind of a subcommittee decision might not always be possible given the time that we have, or necessary given how our decision-making structure actually works.
Yep. Okay. Bram?
I think there would be 3 things that would be helpful to me. and maybe to other counselors. One is for each subcommittee, a summary of these are the recommendations from the first cap that have been completed. These are the ones that we have dropped, and here's why. And these are the new ones. So that's one piece. And then the second piece would be, as we talk about, I mean, you said kind of 30 priorities. Okay, let's say it's 30.
I'm making that up, by the way.
Yeah. Or whatever it is.
Between 10 and 40, probably. Something like that.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. So I think some of the top priorities for each subcommittee will be strategies and actions that were in the first cap, and some will be new ones. So, sort of separately from the first thing that would be useful would be that priority list, but also noting which are continuing priorities and which are new actions that we have added. And then the last thing, which I think might be helpful to the administration and to the legislature, if we have a point of view on timeline and sequencing, if there's sort of for particularly for the 30 priorities, this is the way that it is would most help us achieve our goals if they were done in this order: 2025, 2026, 2027, etc. I don't know if that's possible, but those are 3 thoughts.
And just to summarize them again, Bram, it's like the detail, right? Some of those Excel sheets of the ones that were carried forward, the ones that were dropped, and the new ones, right? Just sort of the detail reckoning of that. The handful of priorities, if they were to lift them up, and then some view on timeline and sequencing.
Yep.
Okay. And just to build off what Jared said initially, like Jared saying, like, it's okay if there's not unanimous everybody's happy with everything. There just needs to be some transparency around, on this thing, some folks felt this way for this reason, other folks felt that way for this other reason. We're just lifting it up to the council. How does that sound to you, Bram, as a pathway out if subcommittees are having a hard time? Yeah? Okay, great. How does this sort of vision that Jared and Bram are they're laying out different pieces of it, but it seems to be coming together. How does that sound to others? Kelly, Liz, Julie, does that seem to work? Okay. It means there's going to have to be there should be, if you have time, at the subcommittee level, some conversation about that sort of top 10 list or top 20 list or whatever, however you want to do it. Again, the sort of top 10 to 40 on the climate action plan requires each subcommittee does a handful, right? All right. Liz, I'd be interested because you brought up the question of like full subcommittee reflection on what's coming out of the task groups. What would be the most helpful thing to signal to the subcommittee to do that reflection, do you think? Liz Miller, sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's just a question of building the agenda to allow for it. Understandably, we've had a lot of just presentation time. I mean, even the electric group that I did at our most recent meeting took longer than I intended, just to present. So it might be just building an agenda where the material isn't necessarily new material. It could be the material that we had previously gotten that the subcommittee is asked to review, and then just building time in the agenda for questions and reflections and potential, concerns to be raised, potentially. I just feel like, overall, the concern I would have is that the subgroups, or whatever we're calling them, we're pretty much self-selected, right? And there's people who have deep expertise, but it's not necessarily wide, in terms of representation. The subcommittee is a wider representation. It's still not as wide as the council itself or the public input that we need to receive, but making sure that the subgroups aren't sort of you know, doing things discreetly on their own that don't have kind of broader discussion, I think is the goal, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably what I would do. Open agenda time, asking the subcommittees to specifically review the prior packets, the prior PowerPoint presentations, and come ready to raise concerns and issues if necessary.
Great. I'm wondering.
That might be helpful even for the prioritization, because I think it was Jared who said, ultimately it's the council, and that we're not expecting the subcommittee necessarily to come with a, kind of separately fully vetted and voted on. But I do feel like it's going to make it hard at the council level if the subcommittee hasn't at least helped with the prioritization and the winnowing. So.
Nice. Julie Moore, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo a couple of the things I'm hearing. I do think understanding which recommendations have unanimous support from the subcommittee will be helpful. Liz's sort of reflection that the work groups are really self-selected, and then the subcommittees represent a mix of counselors and community members, but again, people with expertise or interest in a particular area. And then it's really the council that needs to be able to look across all and help set the overall sense of priorities is really important. But understanding which recommendations enjoy unanimous support from the subcommittees, almost regardless of where they sit on the priority list, I think is an important piece of information for the council to have access to.
Thanks, Secretary Moore. Yeah. Jared?
Sorry. I agree with what Secretary Moore said there. And my earlier comment was just to say, in the event that there's not something that's unanimous recommendation, where there's an option A or an option B in terms of the language that would go along with a recommendation, rather than, if that's not ready, or rather than kind of like pushing a subcommittee vote on it, I'd rather lift that recommendation up for council deliberation and decision making. But I totally agree with Liz as well that I don't think that means that the subcommittees shouldn't deliberate about and make suggestions around prioritization. I think that would be a useful exercise to say, of these recommendations that we want to lift up to the council, we're going to have to pick a number, but what are the, and I think that's an interesting question about how to do that, because it wouldn't be binding, but I do think, whether it's ranked choice or, some type of, prioritization isn't just about what's in or out. It's about, what has higher import or effect. And so having a way to discuss those, in a way to have like a straw poll where that can emerge, I think is an interesting facilitation question for the committees. But I think I agree with Liz that that's worthwhile to do, in addition to lifting up all the recommendations to the council, is having some sense of subcommittee prioritization to accompany that.
Yeah. And it's a dilemma, right? The whole prioritization thing is challenging. Last time around, there was some prioritization, but it ended up with a lot of actions. And cross-sector in particular had a very sort of almost quantitative way to do that, and that seemed pretty effective. The other ones are a little less so. But I agree, it's from a facilitation standpoint, it's very interesting to think about how that moment happens where a subcommittee might lift up a handful of things as being the things that require the most eyes on, like the most attention from the council, from the legislature or the administration. Jane?
Yeah, it feels like an important moment to come back to the modeling, because that you flagged earlier, David, because that's obviously extremely important for cross-sector in order to make informed decisions about the benefits of emissions reductions from the contemplated strategies and actions, and that modeling won't be done for December. And so that's a really hard place for cross-sector to be in order to call or prioritize actions if they don't have that data point. And so just to put a finer point on that is we have finally unlocked the contract challenges we were having here. And that contract is should be executed this week. And our goal in our conversations with that vendor has been to ensure that we update and amend and correct to the business as usual model and have that completed by December. So the goal is that in the imminent future, we'll know what the gap is we're trying to close based on corrections that have been identified to the model, as well as updated information and policies that have passed. And then to work very strategically and closely with cross-sector to update and propose some scenarios to close that gap. And that is what we've had preliminary conversations with the contractor. We feel like we can have a handful of scenarios to review by February.
Okay. And this is something for the steering committee and Jane and everyone, but it's just one scenario is that cross-sector, once modeling is more complete, does meet again and to review as a subcommittee the implications of that. And the whole council knows that, right? And the council's like, oh, we get it, cross-sector. You couldn't really come to us with your top 10 list right now because you're waiting on the modeling. You'll do that in late January, whenever you'll have it, and that's fine. We'll wait for you. Like that I'm just putting that out there as speaking aloud, but that could be one thing because the modeling is so important for cross-sector.
If I may, I'll just say, while I agree with that, and I think the modeling is crucially important to the overall cap, the modeling is not going to be looking at the specific recommended actions that are being drafted in terms of their impact on emissions reduction. I think we know already which actions are going to have a higher or a lower impact on GHG reductions as one key metric. So it will be additional important information, especially for those recommended actions that have a certain target. You know, like right now in the thermal task group, we have a blank space in terms of a updated target on number of homes and buildings weatherized by 2030. And, you know, that number is hopefully going to be updated with a new pathways analysis. But in terms of what are the recommended actions that are going to have a higher or a lower effect on some of our key metrics around emissions reduction, around equity and cost savings, you know, I think we already know that, and the modeling can inform that, but I don't expect big changes in terms of which recommended actions are going to do more or less based on that modeling. It'll just be give us a finer point to put on some of the numbers within those recommended actions, I think.
Okay, that's helpful. All right. So I wonder, in sort of the spirit of rounding up this conversation, one of the things that I think my guess is subcommittees would benefit from is some very clear guidance about the actual deliverable that the council is expecting from them. And based on what you all are discussing right now, like the actual, like, what are you showing to me in December, or what are you sending to me? One sounds like the detail on those Excels, right, of the things that were carried forward, the ones that were dropped, and the new things, right? Some sort of just accountability around that detail. And then some sort of narrative somehow that talks about the areas where there's unanimous agreement, the areas where there isn't, and why not, and what are those different views. And then if they're able to do, which we hope they can, some exercise around lifting up a handful of things that seem critically important to get people's eyes on that exercise and the results of doing that exercise. Does that seem like what we're asking from them? It's probably going to be that Excel document plus some kind of narrative that's put in a Word document or a PowerPoint or both. Seem fair? Okay. And Liz Amler, does that seem aligned with what, we've been talking about in the sort of templates and things that have been provided?
Yeah, I mean, something that we'll just need to remind folks is that some subcommittees are brainstorming or like workshopping on other documents right now and then need to carry it over to those templates. So we just need to remember that needs to be in by that December meeting into those templates so that we're looking across the board at the same format.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Super. Anything else on that? Okay. And I think subcommittee by subcommittee, they're going to need different supports around the prioritization exercise of lifting up those handful of things. And if you all as steering committee members have some thoughts on that, we would absolutely welcome it. Otherwise, we'll be working with co-chairs to really help them think through what that exercise looks like for their particular subcommittee. All right. Excellent. Thanks, folks. That was really helpful. We have this administrative piece of work to do around confirming new counselors, subcommittee appointments. Jane or Liz, you have those handy, right?
Yep, it's pretty simple. And I imagine Liz has updated it, but if not, we can update it right after this. It's just Chris Campany is willing to serve on rural resilience and adaptation, which is great, and Matt Coda is willing to serve on cross-sector mitigation subcommittee. Both of those align with their expertise and the seats that they fill. So they have both, I believe, attended or will attend the upcoming or previous steering subcommittee meetings. So if there's any concerns, now's the time to ask or questions. And then if there's time or any update on Senate appointments, I'd be curious to know if anything's happening there to unlock the resilience seat and youth member seat.
Great. So let's stick with the first thing first. Any concerns about the Chris Campany's and Matt's Coda's appointments? Any concerns about that? I'm not seeing any. Thumbs up.
Not as individuals or on their committees. I would just note that the last time we had this discussion, we had noted that we wanted to keep subcommittees to both a manageable number and a number where we could not have difficulty getting quorum. And I think that I can't remember if we had actually set a firm number or if we just had a kind of a reference number in mind for the size of the subcommittees, but cross-sector is already the largest subcommittee that exists. So these recommendations make sense. They're fine. I just think that we should be aware that we're moving beyond what we had previously said we wanted to do in terms of the size of these subcommittees. And either be okay with that or revise our governance documents or whatever documents. But I think we're going to have to add another line to yet again expand cross-sector.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Julie?
Yeah, I just want to flag. I think that we also need to make sure that there's a difference between how we're looking at adding additional council members and adding additional members of the public. I appreciating Jared's concern and certainly that we need these subcommittees to be of a manageable size. I feel like it's not appropriate to tell a counselor they can't serve on a particular subcommittee and allow members in order to make room for members of the public. And so we probably just need to be cognizant of that if we're making any changes to our guidance document.
Agreed.
Okay. And the issue there is manageable size and quorum, right? Those are the two things that start to happen when you get bigger and bigger. Okay. With that caveat, and I don't know, Bram, if you have not Bram, Jared, if you have a specific suggestion about how we.
I don't. I just wanted to note the issue.
Yeah. Okay.
I agree with what Julie said. it was not bringing it up to say we should do anything different than accept these recommendations, but I just wanted us to be aware of that.
Got it. Okay, thanks. All right, so I'm with that caveat noted, not hearing concerns about letting those two counselors do serve in that way. If we want to move to Jane's second question, if one of the two Senate appointees here has any update on additional appointments coming out of the Senate?
My understanding is that the Senate Committee on Committees is still seeking nominees and is deliberating on them and hopes to make a decision, I think, within the month. That my understanding is a decision has not yet been made, though, but I know that they're actively seeking nominees and hope to make a decision. I think sometime in November is what I had understood from Ashley Moore in Senator Booth's office.
Okay. Thanks, Jared. Jane or Liz Amler, is there anything else on this topic we need to deal with? Is that it?
No, just a reminder for Jared and Kelly as Senate appointments that Veep, is working with us as a CBO now and has capacity and support and has put forward some names for youth members. So, just don't want to miss that moment with them. So if there's anything that could be helpful with, please do engage Veep, just because when you have youth who want to serve, I just don't want to miss out on that. And then
we reached out to
just a
Mariah
reminder.
directly. Yep. So
Great. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. I think that was everything that we said we needed to do. I want to pause for public comment. And so if you're a member of the public, this is a great time to do what Annette just did and raise your hand. And we can take public comment for a moment. Annette, go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning. I have a couple of comments. One is about your discussion just now about cross-sector mitigation. Looking at the list, there are 2 liaisons from Just Transitions on that committee. I'm not sure why there are 2 there, but that's kind of unusual compared to the other committees. And the other is that, Bram, I assume you're running for the legislature and you're on that committee, and if you get in the legislature, I assume you'll be off it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So I'm not sure that there are really any issues with cross-sector in the number of people, especially the number of counselors. So while you were meeting this morning, I took advantage of the speed up the video and caption function of YouTube to review the last 2 meetings of the Ag and Ecosystem Subcommittee, the last meeting of cross-sector mitigation, and the last meeting of rural resilience. And this goes to your discussion about the timeframes for getting the recommendations from the task groups and subcommittees to the council. And I discovered that except for Liz Miller's presentation to cross-sector mitigation on the task group for the electricity subcommittee, it appears that all of the subcommittee work was just around the process and timeframes. So I do have some concerns about how these task groups are going to be able to work on the timeframes, because there wasn't any substantive discussion in any of those other meetings on the actual substance. It was all about the process. So I just thought I'd share that because I don't know if anybody's tracking these in that way, but it was an interesting overview. I do have some input I'd like to offer to the cross-sector mitigation electricity subgroup, especially on the issue of land use and siting, but there appears to be no vehicle for interaction. I also had requested that I talk with the person on rural resilience about the health issues that I encounter in my 25 years of work. And I reached out a couple of times and I have had no response except to pass it along and say, well, you can come and speak in public comment. And frankly, speaking in public comment never involves any interaction and is not what I had in mind in just having a conversation with Alice Peel, who appears to be the point person. So I'm trying to offer the benefit of what I have experienced in Vermont communities, but I don't see a way to interact that is working. And so I just thought I would share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Annette. That sounds frustrating. I appreciate those comments. Matthew's hand is up. Matthew, go ahead.
My question is, about emerging technologies, and we gotta thank Vermont Electrical Co-op because they're the ones that the first utility in Vermont to ever do this. Yeah, just to give you food for thought, they're using AI technology to manage their electric grid across Vermont statewide. I'm wondering with emerging technologies with this, the Climate Council is willing to, investigate, or better yet, are willing to, talk about that, those, components that we're going to need to make our, not just the Climate Council as a whole more efficient, but how can we, you know, use that, technology for the cross-section mitigation, of all our entities, of, not just our projects, but just how to make it more, efficient and worth our time when we're trying to do these type of not just these meetings, but just the systems in place that we have that are aging. How can we utilize the new emerging technologies in a way where we can be more efficient, not just within the Climate Council, but our other projects, across Vermont too, as well. It's not just one entity system. The Climate Council of Vermont has many systems, and some of them are pretty old, So, how can we update our, not just our plans, but for the 21st century that we're looking at, that outlook that we're looking forward, how can we actually achieve what we're talking about, knowing that it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot of us to get things done, and more on. It's more than what we have on our plate. More work than what we have. What we're trying to do, and how can we make emerging technologies, which like I said, Vermont Electrical Co-op across Vermont is doing to make this possible dream reality, a reality for all of us to basically be ahead of the curve. Thank you very much. Just a big question to ask is how can we be more efficient, knowing that we have the people on board on the Climate Council. It's just like what Jared says. It's just what Liz says. It's just there's that workforce component that we're missing in these conversations. Is how are we supposed to get this done when we're so demanded, already over demanded, to get some of these certain deadlines that we need to have done by a certain time. How can we do that with the manpower that we have so far? Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay. That's a big substantive question for Monday morning. Okay. Are there other public comments this morning? All right. I think that's it. Anything else during committee members? Anything, any other reflections?
I do have a question, and I'm happy to take it offline, but I think it's good for everybody to know about. But sadly, Colin Smythe has changed positions, which Jane can speak more about, but it has meant that we do not have a co-chair of the Science and Data Subcommittee from the administration side. And I'm just wondering if there is an update on the kind of timeline and process for identifying that so that we can have 2 co-chairs and begin. Yeah.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, Jane, do you have a thought about that?
Yeah, I raised my hand for something else, but I can address that quickly. So as I told Jared, we don't have capacity in the CAO to co-chair that. And I know that there is another member on Public Service Department, and I know she's indicated that she does not either have capacity to step in. So right now, I don't really see a clear path forward to having an administrative appointment, but I will confer with Secretary Moore and other administration officials to see if there's any other suggestions or paths to pursue. As Andrea, I'll just indicate, has been a sole admin chair for rural resilience for months now. So it's not inconsistent or out of line to just have one chair if there's not capacity from the other body to put someone forward. And we will do our best, Jared, to support posting agendas and supporting setting minutes administratively for you if that has to happen for a while. And Liz is here to do that. So, but
Yeah,
I will follow up with Julie and others to talk about if there's anybody else that we can ask.
Yeah, if one chair is necessary, there's work on drafting that we need to move forward, and I'm happy to do that. Of course, my preference would be to have a co-chair, and I just didn't want to go ahead with planning additional meetings until we had the clarity of whether or not there would be another co-chair.
That's important. Yep. Thank you. I raised my hand just to say a special thank you to Secretary Moore and Bram for joining us on Saturday. We had a really powerful input session Saturday up in Winooski at the Chittenden County. And Kelly, Kelly, you came late, so I'm sorry that I didn't acknowledge you right off the gate, but really appreciate it. And just that was something that was a big effort from the CBI team and Sophie in particular to put on, and it was with leaders of different non-English speaking communities. It was very powerful at the end, and really a chance for them to connect both with what was happening with the update to the climate action plan, and then also with how state officials are meeting their needs or not, to actually try to have some cross-fertilization to put forward strategies for the update to the CAP. Really great though that counselors can join those when you can, because, and I know folks are busy, just because those meetings are really intended to be for you. They're really about the update to the CAP, and we're a conduit to help with that, but it's really important for counselors to show face. And I know at times the members of the community were talking directly to Julie and Bram and Kelly, like they were really excited. They were there to hear, and that felt really true. So as more of those come up and more opportunities like that exist, we'll continue to invite counselors and encourage counselors to talk to other counselors and get people to join those meetings, because I think it's really important and respected by the community members when you all are there for that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Jane.
I just want to say it was a really well put together event, really powerful, and big thank you to Sophie and the folks from CBI and everybody else who helped with that, because I thought it was excellent, and I'm really glad that I got to attend, even though I had to be late. Hearing about people talking about transportation woes resonated though, because I was late because my car broke down.
Oh my God. Sorry, Kelly. Bram?
Just agreed on all points. It was, I think, cannot help but make the climate action plan better the more we are able to hear from the various communities in Vermont directly. And very educational.
Yeah.
And lots of fun.
That's great. That's really great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. We will send around some notes. We'll fix the notes from before. We will see all of you at subcommittee meetings and the like. Andrea had put in the chat about facilitation support as subcommittees are doing those tough conversations. Absolutely. There are plenty of facilitation hours dedicated to that. So let your subcommittee colleagues know that there is time to do that, whether I do it or my colleague Catherine Morris or others, we can make ourselves available. Bram?
And I know everyone's anxious to wrap this up and go trotting merrily along the rest of our days. But I do think it is important that we think about the difficulties that Annette Smith brought up of members of the public engaging with us rather than making, being in a position where they make one-way comments during public comment and then have no idea what happened with those comments. And, just want to put that on our agendas, not try to figure out the right mechanism and restructure things right now. But I think we should take that on.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah. Jane?
It's a great reminder because the subcommittees have been operating under different policy guidance around how to receive and timing of public comment. And this council, which I have forgotten, I'm glad Bram is bringing up, was supposed to revisit how that was going with subcommittees and consider if you wanted to adopt that as policy process for engagement with you all. And so we should make time either at our new ever expanding council meeting that's coming up in November sometime or December to review how that's working with co-chairs and then consider that as engagement. And that can be our Just Transitions reflection at one of those meetings in the next, in the foreseeable future to consider.
Right. Okay, great. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your Monday, your week. Thanks everyone for your time this morning.